John and Elliot, and also you may have noticed we have an interloper in our band. Susie made it in there today, and that after an evening of taking all of our pictures, so thank you. Thank you. Oh, beloveds, as Baker said, this theme of pluralism sort of just ratchets us up into our heads, doesn't it? And it's such an important thing, but it really just is so jar-headed. And so even as I came into this week and saw my sermon title, Towards New Metaphors, I was like, oh, how jar-headed can you be, Williams? It just is so intellectual, and I'm like, what does that even mean? And the thing I'm trying to get at here is that I don't regret for a minute that we do not check our brains at the door, that we are a thinking people, but sometimes we just live above our necks. And we got to feel this stuff if we're going to live it, if we're going to embody these values that we say we hold dear. And pluralism is one such for me. So let me try and get there. Give me some latitude. Since the birth of the U.S. as a nation state, we have referred to or been referred to as a melting pot. It came about because of a fellow in 1782, a French fellow by the name of Hector Saint John de Crèvecœur. My French is awful, so you'll have to look that up to go with that 1782, and it'll get you there. Anyway, he wrote these words. He wrote, "What then is the American, this new man?" And he offered his own reflection, which I guess you can do when you're either a preacher or a book writer. You can reflect on that. So here's his reflection. He said, "The American is one, quote, leaving behind him all his ancient prejudices and manners, receives new ones from the new mode of life he has embraced, the government he obeys, and the new rank he holds." He goes on. He becomes an American by being received in the broad lap of our great alma mater. I am not referring here, this is me talking, to a school or university, rather to the Latin, which means nurturing, nourishing mother. Here, individuals of all nations, he writes, here, individuals of all nations are melted into a new race of men whose labors and posterity will one day cause great changes in the world, end quote. So, in no small way, this is the story that has been told of our country by those inside it and outside of it. And it is a story which assumes many things. That we all came here voluntarily, that there weren't people here already, that with ease we all left behind old ways of being, that our arrival meant that we immediately became an American and were accepted as such, that we were all dedicated to a new government, a new rank, and we owe everything to this gracious, nurturing mother, that we were all melted into a new race of men whose work would be well paid and whose posterity would change the world. Now, it's poetry. I dare say it's religion. It is prosperity, gospel, and American dream rolled into one. Now, unfortunately, of course, this observation by a white European male was a product of its time. A time in which people who didn't come voluntarily didn't count. A time in which people who didn't come voluntarily didn't count, and women didn't count. Indeed, difference of any kind was ignored. And it was supposedly willingly set aside to pick up the mantle of this great democratic experiment. We were all, apparently, glad to become a part of this new thing, an American, a secular thing of high ideals, profound potential, and great privilege. And that became the metaphor and story of America. And it was a singular story. Singular story with much complication within it. Author Chimamanda Adichie gave a TED Talk way back in 2009, my gosh, 17 years ago, to share the dangers of a singular story. You see, Adichie grew up in Nigeria, the daughter of a university professor, and that meant great privilege. Now, she was an avid and early reader, and mostly what she got to read were books written by British and American authors. Like many of us who read at a young age, she also wanted to write and tell her own stories. So she wrote them in pencil and illustrated them in crayons. And as she tells it in her TED Talk of her early writings, she said, all of my characters were white and blue-eyed. They played in the snow. They ate apples, and they talked about the weather, how lovely it was that the sun had come out. Then she reflected upon her early work. She said that she was surprised at both the characters and the context. After all, as she explained it, I lived in Nigeria. It never snowed. We didn't eat apples, we ate mangoes, and we never talked about the weather because there was no need to. So why did she write about such things and such characters, she wondered, and she had to own up to the fact that she wrote about such things because based on what she was reading, that's all there was. In other words, she believed that a real story had nothing to do with her everyday experience. It could only be about the things that happened to other people in other places. So what changed? Well, she started reading a wider variety of writers, including African writers, and in so doing, she had what I like to call a BFO. A blinding flash of the obvious. She realized suddenly that there were more stories than the ones written by white authors that she had first read, and that she, too, could write about her real-life experiences and shape them into the fun and fantasy she had enjoyed in other people's writings. Life, she learned, was bigger than a singular story. Now, this lesson came back to her when she arrived in the United States as a college student, but it was the singular story her roommate had of her. You see, the roommate knew she was from Nigeria, and so she was certain that this young woman, Chimamanda, had come from a rural village. And that in that rural village, she lived in a hut with a dirt floor and a thatched roof. That was her story of how Chimamanda lived, because everyone on the African continent lived that way. And so her roommate was stunned that Adichie could use a stove and actually listened to contemporary Western music. Now, Adichie went on to say that despite these experiences, which are pretty significant, she was astounded to learn that she was still not immune to having a singular story shape her perspective. As she explained, as a resident of this country, she had unconsciously absorbed American prejudice towards Mexicans. Unconsciously, she absorbed the racist discussion of immigration through the news reports of people striving to cross the border. So much so that when she had an opportunity to visit Mexico and Mexico City, she came face to face with her own biased ideas. She was astounded in Mexico City to find a modern city that didn't look really any different than any American metropolis city. Humbly, She realized that she had fooled herself by her uncritical acceptance of an American single story that she had picked up from the media. So, beloveds, this is how it works, right? This is how we create a single story. To show a people as one thing, to show a people as one thing over and over and over again, and then that is what they become to us. To tell a single story over and over and over again, and then that is what we believe. That is how we see the world. Stories shape how and what we see, and we know that. We know that from an earlier war in the Middle East, in which there was a Muslim travel ban, because Muslims were a singular thing. We know that because the whole Make America Great Again is an image of an America that has never made a mistake, that is a particular thing, and will always be that particular thing, except for those regrettable years when it lost its way. We know that from this country's earliest days of the white invasion, which is when it was called a city on the hill, as if it was the model for everyone else in the world, as if everyone else in the world looked up to it. We know it from the ways that any of us speak about Trump voters. Well, you know they. Beloveds, this is how a singular story happens. And this is how it has happened throughout time, and it always will. And yet our faith is saying, yep, that's the way it goes. That's what you folks do. That is what it is to be human. And yet, it's also saying, we can't rest there. Our religion is saying, we must challenge ourselves to pay attention. We are capable of holding more and doing better, and it begins with a deep faithfulness that everyone is born worthy, everyone, and a deep knowing that we are not all the same, and then a still deeper trust that because of and not in spite of our differences, we can be held in a covenant of mutuality and care. I have loved how Christine Robinson put it some years ago. Christine was the senior minister at the Albuquerque church. She is now retired. And she wrote these words: our tolerance, our meaning Unitarian Universalist, tolerance of diversity is not just the sort that, quote, suffers fools gladly. You see, it is the sort of tolerance which believes that truth emerges best. Truth emerges best when people share their different versions in an atmosphere of mutual respect. Our argument for pluralism comes from our theological modesty, that we know enough of truth to inform our lives and give them meaning, but not so much that we could claim it for others, much less force it upon them. This modesty, she writes, is not personal passiveness, but instead a true theology which suggests the largeness of the divine and the impossibility of anyone knowing everything for all time. And so it is, beloveds, as Unitarian Universalists, that we say pluralism is one of our religious values. But we just as quickly say it is because we cannot all know all things. It is just as quickly that we say it is because each of us holds a spark. And because each of us holds a spark, we need to be open to the expression of the divine in others. And the danger of not doing so, in these days especially, is readily apparent. I return again to Chimamanda Adichie, who said that resisting the single story is essential to living lives of justice, care, and equity. She put it like this: it is impossible to talk about the single story without talking about power. There is a word, an Igbo word, that I think about whenever I think about power structures of the world, and it is nkali. It's a noun that loosely translates to be greater than another. Like our economic and political worlds, stories too are often defined by the principle of nkali, how they are told, who tells them, when they are told, how many stories are told, are really dependent upon power. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. The Palestinian poet Morid Borgoti writes that if you want to dispossess a people, the simplest way to do it is to tell their story and start it with, secondly. Start the story with the arrows of the Native Americans and not with the arrival of the British, and you have an entirely different story. Start the story with the failure of the African state and not with the colonial creation of the African state, and you have an entirely different story. She goes on to tell her own story. She said, I recently spoke at a university where a student approached me and said, it's such a shame that Nigerian men were physical abusers like the father character in my novel. And I looked at him and told him I had just read a novel called American Psycho. And that it was indeed a shame that young Americans were serial murderers. Now, obviously, she said, I said this in a fit of mild irritation, but it would never have occurred to me to think that just because I had read a novel in which a character was a serial killer, that he was somehow representative of all Americans. This is not, she said, this is not because I am a better person than my student, but because of America's cultural and economic power. I had read many stories of America. I had read Tyler and Updike and Steinbeck. I did not have a single story of America. So, beloveds, given our country's cultural impact and reach, we know she had to have been exposed to many stories. She lived here. So what we need to pay attention to is her words that remind us that single stories flatten our experience and outlook, that many stories help reflect. The single story creates stereotypes, and the problem with stereotypes, she says, is not that they're untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. It is this that has me say we need new metaphors. The melting pot is incomplete. It may be that some people who arrived on these shores voluntarily came so and were so grateful to do so, but I suspect it was more complicated than that. And if the story we tell is the one about melting pot, it says that there is only one way to be an American. It says that we all look and act the same, and that must be so, and that to be different is to be deficient. You know, the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, who I'll remind you was the senior minister at Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, by that I mean to say he was Barack Obama's former pastor, spoke brilliantly about this as the keynote speaker at a conference of UU ministers I attended some years ago. And he reminded us that we are actually taught to see different as deficient. And we believe it because of the melting pot. Yet he is faithful to the possibility that change will come if we are committed to changing how we look at difference. Here are his words. In the past, he said, we were taught to see others who are different as somehow deficient. Christians saw Jews as being deficient. Catholics saw Protestants as being deficient. Presbyterians saw Pentecostals as being deficient. Folks who like to holler and worship saw folks who like to be quiet as deficient, and vice versa. Europeans saw Africans as deficient. Lovers of George Friedrich Handel and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart saw lovers of B.B. King and Frankie Beverly and Mays as deficient. Lovers of Marian Anderson saw lovers of Lady Day and Anita Baker as deficient. Lovers of European cantatas, comfort ye the glory of the Lord. Lovers of European cantatas saw lovers of common meter, I loved the Lord. He heard my cry, saw them as deficient. In the past, we were taught, he said, to see others who are different as being deficient. We established arbitrary norms and then determined that anybody not like us was abnormal. Sounds about right, doesn't it? But we can unlearn that. We need to unlearn that. Part of doing that is to stop indulging the metaphor of the melting pot, to stop talking in absolutes produced by the single story, and maybe we do need new metaphors to help us. Now, the one I am currently using comes from folk singers Tom Chapin and John Forster. And the lyrics to their song go like this, the start of them. They call my town a melting pot, like a stew or a casserole. But we are not a melting pot. My town is a salad bowl. I appreciate this family of mine. We're tomatoes from a long and sturdy vine, and though we're juicy, flavorful, and sweet, we're not the only veggies on the street. My town is a salad bowl. It's full of delicious things, and the flavor that each thing brings delicifies the whole. My town is a salad bowl. Now, admittedly, it's a little corny. Pun not intended, but it's okay. Honestly, when I wrote it, it wasn't intended, but now that I hear it. But if we are committed to seeing our differences, if we are committed to seeing our differences not as something that casts us out or needs to be invisibilized, but instead as the unique gift we bring to the whole, the thing that delicifies the whole thing, isn't that a better thing to lift up? The metaphors we use train our minds and shape our vision. So why not? Why not embrace one that points us toward the need for each of us, the worthiness of each and all of us, and the practice of honoring each other and our many sacred truths? As Chimamanda Adichie puts it, stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. When we reject the single story, she said, when we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place or any person, we regain a kind of paradise. Beloveds, that is worth our effort. That is why we say pluralism is our value and our hope. May it be so. All my relations. Shanti. Shalom. Amen.